Hi, everybody, and welcome to webinar part 3 of the Learning Katana webinar series. And I'm glad to be back with you guys. And for those of you who are on your third of 3, congratulations. Thank you for taking the time to stick with us through this. And I am sure the team will get your certificates to you one way or the other as soon as possible. And yeah, display them proudly. Okay, so what do we want to talk about today? Today we want to talk about the lighting side of the equation. So we've talked about the basics of Katana. We've talked about the look development, working with shaders, network materials. So today, part 3, we're going to look at lights, rendering. What would you as an artist basically need to know to make lights, place lights, set up lighting, share lighting, and so on. We'll probably not cover every single little detail that you will need to know, but this is the starting point. So let's sort of go on this little trip together, and we will keep on going afterwards in terms of videos and things like that to make sure you guys are all set up, because you've invested this much time so far. So we want to make sure you're all set to go. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so quick refresher in terms of the ecosystem around Katana and what you're looking at. So Katana is half the equation. It's something I want you to keep in mind through all this, that the Katana you work with is a combination of our Katana, the code and the work that we do, the efforts of the renderer vendors, and any custom work that you as a TD or your colleagues who are TDs have done. And so the Katana you experience is going to be the combination of those three things. And right now we've got plugins from Solid Angle for Arnold, 3 to Light, RenderMan, Redshift, and V-Ray. So those are the things that are the power behind Katana to give you the image, and they are also going to have their own take on lighting tools. So explore, try them out, figure out what works for you. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. They're all very smart teams that are working at things, and they all have their own sort of personal flavor. And so Katana is a different beast depending on which one of these you're using. And we'll try and kind of cover what is possible from the Katana level. The renderer specific issues or workflows we probably won't cover as much today, because I want to keep this generic to Katana, so that no matter what you are working with and exploring, that you'll have some information. And without further ado, let's jump into the first of the basics. Okay, so first things first, let's have a bit of a recap since we've not been together on this for a couple weeks. Right, your node graph, 3D scene compositing, you're constructing together a series of nodes that load and create different 3D elements. Then you merge them together, you're assigning shaders, doing things like moving things around, finally adding lighting when it comes to the gaffer. And gaffer 3, keep in mind, there is a gaffer and a gaffer 3 node. The one you should be using and the one that we're showing today will always be the gaffer 3. This is important. The gaffer is there because it was the original tool, and it's there for legacy pipelines. Foundry, we don't believe in upsetting the apple cart, and we try and leave older tools in there so that if you have existing shots from previous projects and we've updated, that you're not left high and dry. Alrighty, and then after that we've got a series of render globals. One thing to point out, you can see how I have 2 render settings nodes. So like we were saying before, the nodes all create scene graph locations which have attributes, right? So it's not done until it's done. In other words, you can set attributes on the root location as it comes from the render settings, and then you can still override them later on. So you have a flexible, dynamic set up. You can set certain settings on one node, you can set them on another one. There's a lot of power and flexibility there. But future videos, we can cover more about that. Okay, so what we have here is the basic building blocks. What you need to understand, like we covered, I think, in the first video, we have the render settings. Okay, so you've got the camera you're going to render from, the rendering plugin you're going to use, resolution, whether or not how you want to adjust the screen window to match based on what the camera and the rendering resolution are, and then the rest of the details. So those are the generic things. Now, if you think of this, it's like in the Maya render globals, there's a basic sort of tab for everything that is like this, generic. It's not going to vary by render vendor. Then, in Maya, there are nodes here that are for the specific global settings for a given plugin. So every single render plugin will have one of these, be it Redshift, Arnold, 3Delight, V-Ray, or RenderMan. There will be specifics there, but if there are things you know well from those renderers, that's where you find them. So if you know how to make V-Ray, fly, and you know where all the right sampling settings are, you go to their global settings node, and you can find it all there. So nothing should be hidden. It's all there. All the controls are used to. It's just a matter of remembering which node and where. Okay. Now, while we're talking about this, I do want to point out one specific thing for those of you who love to work with RenderMan. And in this day and age of path tracing and global illumination and all that is awesome in that world of ray tracing, momentary geeking out there. Okay, so here we go. When you are working with RenderMan and you want to have multiple bounces, there is one caveat. So the global statements node has a lot of the controls you already need. But if you want to turn on multiple bounces, what you do need to do is add an object statements node, and you need to then, under the trace option, set the number of maximum bounces you want. And the key part of this is that you target it at /root. So all the way at the beginning of the world. Okay. Doing this will make sure that your scene is ready for multiple bounces and you're all set to go. Some of the other plugins have that all compacted to the global nodes, but no harm, no foul. It's just the way it works here. And the logic being that this is also a control that you can put on a per object basis. So you can fine tune the control of your scenes in terms of maybe you want to have two globally, maybe you want one thing to contribute more, or you want a higher level for most, and you want to be able to turn the objects in the background down. Nonetheless, that is the power of RenderMan. That is the flexibility. But with that just comes this extra step. Okay. So with the render globals out of the way, let's talk about the different types of rendering that you can do. The thing to understand is that as an artist, you have two types of rendering available to you within a scene. And you can invoke them by right-clicking on any node in the scene. Okay, it's not the node that is visible that is the one that is rendered. It is the one that you invoke from. Now, you don't have to have it selected. You can actually just hover over it. And you have the choice of preview render and live render. What is the difference between the two? A preview render is, well, if we kick one off right now, we'll come to this node to do it. It's what you expect. It is going to launch a render, draw all the pixels, and then whether it be progressive update or bucket based, then you're going to have, it's going to stop. And if you can hear the fan of my computer starting to spin up, you can, it's gearing up and then it's going to be done. CPU is going to cool down and it'll stop. So never mind the jet airplane in the background. And if you do hear airplanes, that's occasionally Heathrow. Right. So you have two types of rendering available to you within the UI. There's the third, which is obviously the batch rendering. You need a render node license, and you invoke it from the command line, just like a shell, and this is how your render farm will get started. There is no option within Katana to launch a batch render from the UI. It's just an industrial pipeline tool, so it was sort of always separated. Okay, and in that sense, you have your second option. So if we want to render from here, you also have live rendering. Okay, love it, love it, love it. I mean, it's not something that's just exclusive to Katana. The world of live rendering from an artist standpoint is awesome. So if you guys don't do it much, definitely check it out. All right, so live rendering. It is a great segue because it keeps updating no matter what. Now, those of you who might have tried Katana and have tried live rendering, and if you haven't seen the video, if you haven't sort of done that old school step of reading the manual, then let me give you the quick tip on why you probably found it initially a little daunting or frustrating. Okay, so we've got a live render going. It's should be listening to updates. Okay, change light color. Nada. All right, why did that happen? So what is going on is that Katana, you have to remember, is a tool that was built for scale, right? So we're talking hundreds, thousands of objects in a scene, and how do you sort of have a mechanism that allows for efficient workflow in that scope? So the answer is the working sets. And what we had, and we kind of talked about this earlier, is we have what's visible in the viewer. Okay, so you can control it on a per object basis, what's visible in the render, and what's visible or adds updates for live renders, right? So I can come up to the top here, and because it's a small scene, very easily say that I want to take from root and include with children. Oh, looky there, we get our light turning red. So now everything we change is going to change with us. This is one area that I will say each of the renderer plugins is a bit variable in terms of what can it support in the live render right now. Katana itself is capable of basically providing every single update to the renderer, so it's just a matter of where are the renderer plugins in their development, and I am sure that if there are things that don't work in the current versions, that everybody will be looking to make sure that they are updated and working in future versions. So we will keep plowing ahead with Katana to make sure that everybody can do all the things that they possibly want to, and the render vendors are going to keep up and their development and always advancing forward, right? So when in doubt, if you have specific things that don't work, that you need to work, talk to your render vendor and encourage them to make the changes that work for you. Okay, so we can, in a live render, based on which renderer plugin we're working with, you can change everything. All right, so that's the basics of preview render and live render. Disk render, again, you start from the command line. It's easy. You can look it up in the manual. We'll probably cover that more specifically in a more TD focused video later on. Now, before you do get into rendering, do remember there are a minimal set of basics that you need to have. You should have a camera, you should have objects, you should have shaders, and if you want to see something, you better have a light. And then finally, just make sure that you've got at least one render settings node and the globals node for that specific plugin. If you've got that covered and you have those building blocks, then you should not have an issue. And if you run into trouble with things, then definitely reach out to us on the forum. Okay, so with that, let's jump into how do you actually then make a light. So we will take a look at that next. All right, I just said we were going to move on to making lights and things, but I did just quickly gloss over in the viewer visibility or the render visibility working set, and I wanted to make sure I took a step back. There are a couple things you need to know. All right, so we've covered the live update. So you know that when you're doing a live render, if you don't have these toggled, you're not going to get the updates. Typically, if you're adjusting shaders on an object, please make sure you have the object that is being updated visible or selected. Easy way if you want to make sure you're getting at it, don't forget you have the pixel buffer and you can access that exact piece of geometry from the render through that pixel buffer to the working set location and toggle it on or off as needed. If you want to work from a higher level down, remember that all the working sets have this included with children option. So you can either be exact with included, and you can work with included with children. And of course, you can also do things like exclude. So you've got the full power there. But let's talk a bit about the actual viewer visibility. So let's say we had more of a set around this guy or multiple characters, and you wanted to actually isolate him from the rest. How do you do a render and make sure that it only works with him? First off, these are always on. These two you need to toggle on and off. Okay, so first things first, turn on the updates or the viewer visibility, the render visibility, right? So then you next choose what you want. So here I've selected his body, and the catch to things, if we scroll down to the bottom, won't make you wait for it. The camera should come in already pre-selected, so you can. That's why it's got that little checkbox there. But you can move it if you put it on if you want, or if you have multiple cameras. Importantly, make sure your lights are on. Okay, so very effective way to do this is just purely come to the light group and say that you would like this included with children. Then you're covered. Okay, if you don't do this, you're going to get a black render. So let's take a look at what happens. I do this with preview, and we have Ace without his shield, even though if we look in the scene, he does have his shield. Okay, now if we are to then turn this off and we were to do another render, you'll see that we get the shield back. Okay, so this is your way. Again, at some point I've probably mentioned this concept that there are layers for the artist and layers for the pipeline. All this with the working set that you're experiencing here is all about you as the artist and how can you modify your Katana project setup so that you have the most control over your scene to work as fast as you possibly need. Now, this does mean that you are not in danger of ruining a shot as it goes through the render farm, because all these working set choices in terms of what's shown in the viewer, rendering in a render, and the live render updates have no effect on batch render. So you are safe to tweak as you need to do your job. Because remember, lighting at the fundamental basis, at the end of the day, you are trying to figure out what light goes where, pointing in what direction, at what intensity, with a given color, and a given size for the quality, so that you're essentially working on the art direction. You're not here to pull 1,001 levers, though sometimes lighting does feel like that. Okay, so we've covered that. Let's now move on to the actual creation and manipulation of lights. All right, so we'll break this down into a few steps. So here we are back in this file. We've got one area light from Pixar. They call it the PXR Rect light. And they all go by different names, but essentially they are all a quad shape of one kind or another, and have awesome flexibility. And because if you remember, the quality of light, like the softness or the hardness, is dependent on the ratio of the size of the light source to the object that casts the shadow. So, and you have many ways to affect that: distance, the actual scale of the light, so on and so forth. But how do you get it in there? So we're working with the Gafford 3 node. Like I was saying before, Gafford 3, not Gafford, please. The Gafford 3 has way more power, and it's the one that we'll be supporting moving forward. All right, so adding lights, pretty straightforward. Now, the RenderMan team have done an awesome job of creating all these types of lights. So it's one of the reasons why I want to work with this plugin here. So we've got all this variety that you can work with. And so if you want another area light, you can go that far, and there you go, you've got a scene. All right, we'll just delete that one. Now, the traditional way of working with things in Katana is a little bit different. And before RenderMan did that, what you would have done is you would have said, okay, I want to make a light object. Cool. All right, you get your very generic light source in there. And then you pick the shader. And we can come back and pick the rectangle light. And there you go. So you end up with the light, generically named. You pick the material, which then puts the right kind of light icon in the scene. So that's the first way of making, or I should say, that's the traditional way of making a light. But depending on the renderer plugin, and if they have made these little shortcuts, then you can make it this way too. But fundamentally, it's doing the same thing. It's making a light, it's adding the light material to it, and in this case, it adds a specific name and icon to it. So then let's take a look at what is the difference between these. Okay, so one of the areas that will play into this is the constraint system. So at the bottom of our generic light object, you will see this enable aim constraint. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute, but just know that it is not always there on all the custom lights by the renderer vendors, and if you do need it, then your best option is to basically create a generic light and then add the light shader to it. And by the way, guys, if I interchange shader and material when I'm talking, but in Katana, everything that you call a shader gets really assigned as a material. But here we go. The PRMan light shader with a rectangle. Okay, so taking a look at things, you've then got an object tab, which will have the various controls of transform. So if you want to manually tweak numbers, this is where you find it. The material tab is where you will find all the light shader properties. Okay, so PRMan guys have put in notes, which is nice. You can then also have all your controls, right? So this is going to vary by the renderer plugin and the light source that you're looking at. And then we have the linking tab, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So adding lights, you've got your two methods. Now, next up comes the moving of lights. So when you have a light source, you can select it. Now, I want to make this clear that there's a few options that you have. You can choose 3 syncing of selection modes. What is this? It means where are you choosing the light that you want to manipulate? Okay, so if I'm in here, you can see that there's a selection because the scene graph has it selected. So if I come here and pick elsewhere, you can see it moves around, right? But I'm now in here, and it's not adjusting or picking the lights. Why is that good? If you, as an artist, want to be able to pick in the scene to select the light to move it, but independently want to be able to change light material properties or light shader properties, then the off sync is good. Now, if you have it this way at out, you are changing the scene graph selection based on this. Okay, so just trying to demystify this for you guys. And the typical one that I like is in and out. It's just a no nonsense. If you select something in the gaffer, it gets selected in the scene graph. If you select it in the scene graph, it gets selected in the gaffer. It's a personal choice. You guys can use whichever one works for the workflow that you want to have when it comes to lights. Okay. So moving lights then. Katana splits its manipulators into world space and local space transforms, or world and object, however you want to look at it. The Q for selection, W for translation, E for rotation, R for scale. It's all standard. that works in the object space. If you then have S for translation, D for rotation, and, well, no scale in this particular case. So what do you got there? You have the world space. So if you, like in this case, this light, let's say that we like the tilt that it's at, I can still come in here then, having picked the world space translation, and just rotate it around. Whereas if I had been using the local space, then I would be trying to sort of twist on different parameters. And depending on how you've arranged your light in space, it could be that you want to work in either local or in world. Okay. All right. Important detail. So let's move this guy up. Okay. So here we have two lights. Is it possible to select two lights? Yes. Is it possible to move two lights right now in Katana in this version 2.5 v5 that are selected like this? Not currently. Is it something we want to fix? Absolutely. It will come with the viewer updates that we're doing later this year. Okay, so that gives us a good way to segue into the rigs, because the rigs are the way that you can move a group of lights together. So you come in, right click, add, and then you can say you want to add the rig, or you can hit the R key. Grab your lights, middle mouse drag them, and you just want that little bar to indent. There we go. Now those two lights are underneath the rig, which acts like a locator. I can now move them together. So it is has benefits, has drawbacks. It's the way things are right now, and like everything else in the world, it will improve over time. Okay, so that is how you would move multiple lights together. You can move, translate, rotate. Depending on the light icon or tools, you have more or less controls in terms of custom manipulators. Now, one thing that comes up with rigs that's actually really cool is that you can say on a rig that you want to export it. Okay, so you can export this rig to your file system, right? Or you can, if you've got an asset plugin, it'll go out through that. So you can create a character rig as a generic starting point, and then you can share it between multiple setups, because then you also have that option to import the rig under the add. So you can share rigs if you want to have one on a per character basis, however you want to work. You can group lights together, get them out there, and bring them back in. All right. So we've covered adding lights the two ways, moving lights, and importing and exporting in with the rig. Let's refresh our scene and then move on to things like constraining. Okay, so here we are, cleaned up setup, simple light again, white light, nothing to sort of distract us. Wanted to take a look at constraints and the main way that you are going to do a constraint. So in Katana, the main way to constrain lights to objects for building up rigs and things like that is with the rig. All right, so let's add a rig. Let's put this light underneath it. All right, so we've got a nice position. We're happy with this. Let's say this character was supposed to be walking around. Then where are our constraint controls? You click on the rig, you see you have enable point constraint and orient constraint. Okay, each of these functions in pretty much the same way. All the devil the details is in the manuals, so check it out there. But what we can do is, if we want to pick, say, his belt, and what we can do is grab that and we can drag that in here to those two items. And at that point, as he moves around, the light will move with it. And if he is to twist, the light will twist with it. So if you want to actually create a rig for a character setup and you want to work that way with it, this is one of your ways to do that. So cool thing is that you are setting the exact path, so keep that in mind, that you are not driving these constraints by expressions. So it's an explicit. So if you want to have a generic rig that you import, the light linking will come through with expressions, but the rig itself would need to be reconnected either by an artist or by a script. Okay. All right, that's the basics of that. All right, guys, so here we are in the 3-to-Light plugin setup. I've got a basic file that's built from one of their examples, and we'll post this one for you. Now, let's talk a bit about light linking. These guys have all the various ins and outs of light linking covered interactively, so this is why we're here to discuss it. So, light linking, as you all well know, is bread and butter lighting workflow. It's no matter how close we come to physics and reality, art direction is its own has its own demands on us as creatives and as technical people. So it's a definite sort of tool in your tool chest, and the more interactive it can be, the better. So here we've got our various objects. We've got a rim, 2 side lights, and then I've got one that is already specifically light linked to everything else. But let's take a look at this rim light. So rim light across the rest of the scene. I'm just going to solo this light. And what we can see is that it's hitting everything, right? So what happens when we want to start light linking it? What's the process? What's the thoughts? How do you go about setting this up? So first things first, what you should work towards is whether or not there's an initial state. So if you want the light to be always on and then exclude certain options, you can work with that and then the off. But let's focus on what happens when you want to have a light only affect certain things. So you can set the initial state to off. Okay, so here we go. The only remaining illumination from here is from the incandescence on the coil. So as you can see, it's going through pretty quick, which is cool. But let's get that rim light back on, but let's put it on only the sphere. So the light is not illuminating anything by default. We have the option to say we want to add something in the on field. Cool thing about light linking in Katana is that it can be driven with the full power of cell, which means that, again, the lights become transportable between various setups, and your light linking becomes flexible or dynamic, however you want to think of it. If you need to have a rim light on an army of characters, you can use an expression to drive the light linking to those characters, and then if the art director or director asks for 20 more characters to be added, you're not going to go in and manually start picking individual characters and have to keep up with it. In fact, there are going to be a certain number of changes that it is possible that you wouldn't actually have to be involved in the update if the pipeline was automated to be able to update the inputs enough. But anyways, I digress. Let's take a look at this. So we have, in this case, the sphere. Now I can do multiple things. I can shift middle mouse drag that into here. You can see it adds it on. I could also then say I wanted to have everything that is geometry affected, right? I could set this up as a path collection or a path icon. I don't want to confuse you with using different names for the same thing. All right, so here we go. We've added the sphere. Director comes back and says, hey, you know what? I want it on the cylinder. You added the cylinder. You're all good. If you wanted to put it onto one of the other pieces, say this one. There you go. Now with it being glass and transparent, you can see we're only getting it through that part. So you can add it in piecemeal as you need to. And again, you have the option of using expressions or explicit selections. And that is pretty much how you would go about it. Shadow linking, if you need it, works the same way. So again, logic of, do you choose on, off, and then which particular objects do you want to cast shadows. Okay, so that is light linking in a nutshell. How much it happens interactively will vary by plugin. Just know that Katana has the capacity for people to do it all live, and it's just a matter of if it doesn't happen live yet, then people will get to that point with their renderer plugins. All right, guys, so here we are, back with our buddy Ace. He's looking a little pale. Maybe sometime in the future we'll put some color back on him. But right now, let's talk about light filters. They are a technique that has been around for a while, but certainly one that has direct applications now that we're in this beautiful ray tracing world with global illumination and all the physics taken care of. The reason why light filters exist is that art direction doesn't often match physics. Just like light linking does not exist in the real world, there are very few ways to control light to the degree of which art directors ask for when it comes to computer graphics. So in this sense, let's take a look at what we've got. This is like being on a movie set. We've got a big giant area light. This on a movie set would have been probably some lights behind a scrim to create the soft light effect. And as you well know, you choose your light source based on the qualities of light that you want it to emit into your scene or be captured by the camera. So in this case, a light this big is giving us these nice highlights and the softness of the shadows, but it's throwing light everywhere. So how would you control that? In Katana, you would use a light filter. Now, light filters are not new and they're not a Katana invention. They have been around. But what we're looking at here with the RenderMan plugin is how do they interface with the Gaffer 3. All right, so we've got the Gaffer 3, we've got the light filter. Now, it's not making an impact yet because we haven't chosen one. So what we do is you come back down and through the list. In the case of RenderMan, let's look at the rod. Now, before we do anything else, we should note it's not affecting the scene. And what we need to do is we will move it up underneath the light filter or the light. So by dragging it underneath the light, so it's parented by the light, essentially, it is making an association between that light filter and that light. But notice how it popped position. So always get things into the working with the light that you want before you make the association to the light. There's a trick I'll show you in a minute that allows you to have a light filter used by multiple lights. But first off, that's the first step. Now, the reason why this particular one, by default, the Pixar rod is creating a light vacuum. So here we are going to turn it off. Now you can see already we've been able to taper or constrain the light. So basically the rod is creating a volume in which that light can work, and outside that volume the light doesn't work. Okay, so we can come in and we can also rotate it. This will then stay, because it's parented to the light, if the light moves around, this is going to stay with it. And like I said, there's a technique I'll show you in a second that does allow you to control or work with light filters that stay static regardless of what's happening with the light. Okay, so there's lots and lots of controls on the various light filters from the various render vendors. I totally advise you to check it all out. This particular one, let's just say one, make it a little bit softer. So you can control the fall off, you can control all those things. The RenderMan one has some pretty cool GUI controls. You can interactively change aspects of the shape of it. I just hit the tab key to bring those controls up. Okay, so we can see all those aspects all covered. Okay. Now, if you you can go through all the various ones, but if you want to get into where, let's say, perfect example of using a rod would be you have a room, 4 corners, you want light to fall off into those corners. So you could put a rod in a static position so that the light doesn't get into the corner, but you have multiple lights. And you're seeing, how do you have multiple lights working with a light filter? The answer is light filter references. Okay, so let's unparent this one. So I'll just drag it out there. Okay, it changes its position. Let's get the rotation and position back to where we like it. Okay, so let's say a bit like that. So a light filter reference. How do you go about making one? Well, first off, let's just reinitiate our live render to pick up the fact that we're not connected to the light anymore. Okay, so we've got our light blasting through the scene. And let's now add a light filter reference. So light filter reference, simple, straightforward. We should be able to say we want to add a light filter reference. Sorry, I gotta have the light selected. There we go. So this light is now ready to say, hey, give me the light filter that you want me to share. So sharing, referencing, same idea. Okay, now what is the trick? Things to consider. If you're working with in and out, so if I come down, hey, I'm going to pick that one. Oh, wait a second, you've moved off of the light filter reference, because what you want to do is you want to fill out this reference path, and the path it's referring to is the scene graph location path to the light filter. So you've got 2 options. One, this is a case where having this set to off, because then this stays independent of what's happening out here, right? Okay. The other option is if you're working in and out mode, you just simply will come across here and middle drag, so you're not using your left mouse button click, and you pop in the reference right there, and we should be off to the races. So we can come to here now and start making changes to everything, right? So if I reduce the edge, there we go. It picked it up automatically. I didn't have to restart my live render, so we are ready to go. Now what happens? I add another light. I can add another light filter reference, and that light filter can now affect multiple lights. This is really cool, very powerful. Use it responsibly in terms of, everything comes with a cost when it comes to rendering. So nothing's for free, and you need to sort of just balance things out. But the light filter references and light filters combined with the Gaffer 3 are super cool, super powerful, and they do enable you to get to that art-directed result faster. Okay, so I want to shift gears and let's start looking at how some of these pieces come together in a shot pipeline. Let's take a look at a bit of a production scene. This is a short animation kindly shared with us by a talented animator by the name of Brian Vowles. Let's take a look at his short real quick.
There's a Moto user who finds our antics to be somewhat disconcerting.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I think in the interest of saving our show, David,
we need to
bring it down. And so, this week on Modcast, we'll be talking about 701 sneak peeks.
Yes. Let us discuss recently the Moto 701 sneak videos that we've been posting on our YouTube playlist.
David, I gotta tell you,
and Indirect Connect.
I'm very excited about the videos we've been posting.
I think the videos elaborate on our ideals as a company and what we like to project to our user base.
Yes, I hope I can convey my excitement to the community about these videos.
Whoa, Brad. Tone it.
Bring it down. I apologize.
I
can't do this anymore.
It's like, you cannot cage the beast.
So how do you make use of that in Katana? Or how would you light that in Katana, as I should say? So it's 21 shots, and as a lighting artist, there are tools in Katana that allow you to control and light a whole sequence at a time. So I've got a live render running. I'm going to come in and add an area light. And because I've already pre-selected everything from the root down with saying included with children on the live render updates, everything is now updating. So I can come in, add that light, and very quickly start placing it. Okay. So yeah, you know what? That's not bad. Let's just make it a little softer. Now here's the history on this project. We can distribute these files. We want to do a bit more cleanup. This is just kind of the preliminary working version of it. So we will finish this up. We will distribute it out to you guys, and we look forward to seeing what you guys can learn and push back to us in terms of setups and just lighting. Just have fun making it look good. But we'll post it in a bit when we've done some more cleanup. Okay, so we've got here. Let's just say that this is key_Brad, and I'm going to duplicate this light, and let's just change the name on this one to key_David, and we'll just move it over, and we're good there. Not bad. Let's say that we want to probably add in a bit of a fill light. Okay, so I can add another area light, and let's just call this fill. No, it helps when you pick the right handle. Right, okay, so we've got a basic key, so let's give this a little nice, a warmer, a little too, let's find that nice spot. Okay, now cool things you can do, copy, paste as expression. So now those two are linked. One last thing for me to tweak. Okay, a bit of a warm, cool balance going. All right, so I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me light, but say this was the beginnings of our setup. We can come in and do all manner of work across all this if we wanted to. Now, maybe this is a case where what we would want to do is we'll come on to this one. We're going to say that we're going to turn off the initial state. Same thing with David's light. Now what we can do is on Brad, we can find Brad, and we can say that we want to select that in the scene graph. We can walk up a bit higher, find his character, drag it across. There we go, beautiful. Let's do the same thing with David. All right. And we are going to add that there. Right, so we got those two. Now this means that because we have them isolated, we can also, we've got the nice warm or cool fill, but we can put in just an overall key light from the top. Reorganize things a bit. Let's pull this one up, rotate it down, scale it out. Right. Now in this case, just add a bit. And let's take these down. Okay. I liked them when they were a little punchier. We'll split the difference, but all right, bear with me a sec. So let's say that's what we want. Let's actually, for a second, just come to here, and we're going to crank this up a notch. So let's set this up to lucky number 7 for all our bounces, and just quickly restart our live render. All right, that's better. We're getting, the global illumination is doing more of a job. It would do better if I had a floor in the ceiling, but that's neither here nor there. So let's take a look at what does it mean to be in Katana now that we've got this little bit of a setup done. And you can see that, in a plugin with all the right kind of live rendering feedback, it's really interactive. So I'm quite positive about what everybody is going to be able to do. Now, here's where the fun starts. So as you saw from that short, we've got about 21 shots. Well, we do have 21 shots. Some of them are the same. Some of them are different in terms of the camera composition. Let's say that we actually, before we start that, let's just do one last thing. Let's add a rim light. Okay. And we want to add that in. And I will undo my changes there because I somehow managed to move my top light. Hazard of working on a Cintiq. Okay. So there we go. We got that guy back up there. Let's add back in my area light that we were talking about, and let's quickly position it as a rim. Okay, because I want to have that as part of our discussion. Right. And let's see where we are here quickly. Alright, and here let's have a perfect example of light linking. Let's take this one, turn it off. Let's add a custom here, and what we can do is we know that if we look at our characters, that there is a naming convention in place. And so it's CHR. So let's just drag this one in for an example. Now what I can do is I can say that I want to use that like so. So now the rim light is linking to only the characters. Let's add it to the chairs as well. It seems to make a little more sense that way. Okay, and so we know that we have prop chair 2 in here as well. And again, we can just add the wild card, and there we go. So our rim light is across both characters, and just balance this one up a bit. Okay. We'll just make that, we'll just give it a bit of a odd color. Make it a little bit more warm. Just to add a little bit more detail in what we're looking at. I do not make any claims that this is the world's best lighting. It is just for illustration purposes. All right, so we've got a key light linked per character. We've got an overall top fill. We've got a rim that is linked to the chairs and the characters by expressions, and we have the rim light or the fill light that is just throwing a bit of extra light in. We've got 7 bounces going on. Now, what the piece I wanted to get to is this. There's something called the graph state variable. The graph state variable is a mechanism of creating an environment variable, shall we say, if you use that in your production pipeline. It's really a key value pair, so you can say anything you want. It could be time of day, it could be the set of shaders. It's just basically, a category and then a set of values that fill that out. They are found here under the project settings. Okay, so under variables, you can create a variable, you can fill it out with a whole range of inputs. These are then available to you to use with the variable switch node, the variable enabled groups, and this gives you great flexibility. In this case, I am plugging through multiple cameras and multiple animation caches through a variable switch so that essentially I have all 21 shots of Brian Short available to light in this one setup. Okay. So what is cool about this? All right, great. So I've got all the shots, but the best part is that you can actually work across all of those shots together. All right, so we have our master setup. Now we talked a bit about live groups before, so let's live group this one. Okay, and I've made a group, converted it to a live group, and then I can say publish and finish editing contents, and we'll go and call this master lighting. All right, so this is now saved to disk. It could be imported into another setup, and it's ready to go. So this is how you would create your library of lighting if you needed to have that for your production. Let's just give this a new name. All right, so there we go. We have master lighting. It's saved to disk. We're all good. What's next? So what's next is that you might have the wide shot driving the art direction. Right, so let's say this is approved. Wouldn't call it approved myself, but hey, we'll just use it for illustration purposes. So say this was the setup, and you wanted to work with this, and you needed to go in and start making tweaks. All right. Or let's say that this was the beginning startup. I can't let it go that there's a few points burning out. So how do you work with it? So you're the lighting artist, your master lighter is set up, the library, you've imported it. How do you make changes? Well, this is why we said use the Gaffer 3, not the Gaffer. You can bring in another Gaffer 3. All right, you look at it, or you edit that node. First things first, it'll come in blank. If we then say show incoming scene lights from this little gear icon, okay, it now shows you all the lights that have been created at this path, okay, which is the default Gaffer path, and everywhere else. So all the accumulated lights made by any number of Gaffer 3 nodes is now shown here. What does this mean, though? It means we had the beginning of being able to make a beautiful dynamic setup. So what I can do is, all right, so let's say that we think that the overall color for this top light being red is not what we want. Fine. So let's say that we want to right click on that light, say adopt for editing. It is now available to change. This is, the very cool part where the flexibility of Katana starts to show up. All right, so let's say that we want to make it a different color. So we can start to just drop it back so we're only getting a hint of the color. Very cool, right? Let's say that the fill is just a bit too strong. It's overpowering the rest of the scene. So you can see I'm double clicking, nothing. Remember, you want to adopt for editing, and then you can make the change. Okay, so, right, something a little bit more subtle. There we go. Let's just skew it maybe a bit more this way. Slightly, yeah, there we go. All right. So there we go. We've made two color choices that override what came from the lighting library. Next thing, let's say that we want to adjust the intensity of that overall top fill. Or let's say we want to rebalance it. We'll make more come from the general overall fill, and we just want to use the linked lights more as accents rather than them driving the look. Right, so the thing to keep in mind when you're doing these edits on these lights is that you are only changing and recording the parameters that you touch. So I have now touched the color on these two, the intensity on that one. But if the master lighting, which is coming from this gaffer, which is imported, or shall we say referenced, through the live group mechanism, it will receive those updates. So think of it this way. If you wanted to position the rim on a shot-by-shot basis, but you wanted everything else about the rim to stay the same, it's going to work that way. So I'm really excited about what options this gives you guys. All right, so let's just quickly make a couple more changes here. And let's just drop that back. Fine, that looks good. All right. And there we go, fine. All right, so we're in a better place. The lighting, I don't feel like I'm about to be thrown out of any kind of sort of, or lynched for any transgressions from my professors from back in the day when I learned about lighting. All right, so we've got a basic setup. We've just altered it. Now let's take a look at what happens, say, when we go to shot 70. So we're not getting much of the effect of the rim, and maybe we want to drop the lighting off on the red character, which is the voice of David Tracy, or that is the embodiment of the voice of David Tracy, I should say. So how do we go about doing that? Okay, so first off, the art direction is overall has been imported from an improved setup, adjusted to meet the needs by using the Gaffer 3 to inherit. Now we want to start making per shot changes, and so that we can get into finessing this setup. So first things first, you would create a variable switch, insert that into the setup. Now the important part, don't forget to tell it what is the variable name. So here we're using shot, make sure that says shot. Okay. Now what happens is this switch is going to take multiple inputs. In this case, we're going to make another Gaffer 3 node. Okay, I'm just going to put it over here, and we're just going to call this master tweaks. Call this shot 0070. Okay, so what I can do is I can pull the lighting from there, and you know that we can change it, and we're going to put it in there. So what's happened now, if you look at the patterns, we've got a default one, and we've got input number 1 and input 0. So we're going to say on input 1 that we want to say that this is going to be 0070. Okay, so it now means that instead of pulling directly from here, it will pull through that branch and pass it through. All right, so let's go in here, do exactly what we did before. And we've now said, okay, we're going to show the incoming scene lights. So let's make a few choices here. Let's go to David's key light, and we're going to adopt for editing, and we will turn it off. Okay, so we've pulled him down a bit. Maybe we would just keep a little bit on it. Okay, fine. Now what we want to be able to do is say that we want to adopt the rim. Okay, because now what I can do is I can take this rim light, and I can totally bring it over here, and let's just tweak it so that the rim light is affecting Brad's character more than David's. Okay, and for good measure for illustration, let's just make sure that we've got something really obvious, okay? So, what have we done? We've tapered the intensity off of David. We've changed the position and color of the rim light. Now what happens? I go back to shot 10, and you can see it all pops back, right? We come here, lighting's fine. So this is fundamentally the process that you can follow for adjusting a whole sequence from the lighting standpoint. And it's not, again, something we can, or you'd have to pre-set up, as it were. So you do have the ability to kind of go on the go with the flow if you're working as an artist. If you're in a more formalized production pipeline, these graph state variables and the choice of these shots and how they're arranged is more likely going to be set up and chosen for you. In which case, then you're just responding to the needs of the particular ones and putting the gaffers in for the right shots. But you can still, as an artist, do it freeform without needing to have the formalized pipeline set up. So here I'm looking at one where we've got a similar camera angle. And I just want to show you that the way that you can inherit and layer changes will work all the way through at multiple levels. There isn't like a hard limit to it. So we've got shot 70. I'll just say, okay. Then let's now put in another gaffer 3. Let's wire it up. Oh, keep that there. Wire you to there. Get this over to here. We now have a new input on here, which we can say is going to be shot 20. All right, so it's now pulling through this. Immediately you see what happens is that the lighting had normally been coming through this default pipe. It is now coming from here to here and then through the rest, okay? Right. So what we can do at this point, same as before, show the incoming scene lights, and you can make any changes you want. So this is the flexibility of being able to package all this up, share it, import it, adjust it, and then light a whole sequence through it all. Okay. So, and if you needed to, something that's very important to understand about Katana is that this whole set of group nodes could again be live grouped and turned into a live group. Okay, so there are not the limits on the number of layers of referencing or sort of how times you roll it all together. You do have a lot more flexibility, so this does give you power for the pipeline. Okay, guys, that is about all we have time for today. I know we probably didn't cover everything that we'd all hoped to go through, but we'll put out some subsequent videos that cover things in more detail. And we'll go from there. And I want to say thank you again to all of you who have spent the time with us on all 3 weeks. It has been more than a pleasure to put these videos together for you, and I look forward to doing more. And please join us on the forums, reach out, ask questions, and keep your eyes peeled for any follow-up videos and assets. All right, take care, guys, and enjoy Katana.